Uh, Thank you, Will and Deanna, and now Avalon Owens, for helping to demonstrate how important it is that we build the larger coalition, build the larger connections with not just astronomers who traditionally have been the core of dark sky preservation, but with the much larger conservation, biology, environmental organizations that are represented by our three expert speakers today. Avalon Owens is a PhD candidate at Tufts University in the Department of Biology. She has interests in conservation and ecology. She got her degree undergraduate from Harvard and then a master's degree from the National Taiwan University. She also has interest in science communication. She has spoken widely already on this topic of fireflies and other insects. And her papers most recently address specifically the impact of light pollution on what's commonly known, and you've probably read in the popular press, as the insect apocalypse, and specifically the effect on fireflies, everybody's favorite insect. Avalon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. Yes, I love fireflies too. All right, let me share my screen and then do one of those and then put your little faces right here, and I'll get the chat up as well before I start. Yes, so hello everyone. I'm really happy to be here. And thank you very much for the introduction. I guess I'll just get started so we can get to the good stuff. This talk was a version of it I gave for IDA Dark Sky Week, so hopefully none of you saw that because it's very similar, but I've tried to make it a little bit more local, and if you have any questions about local fireflies, I would also be very happy to answer those. So let's start by thinking about the night sky. This is dark sky, right? So night sky, it's awe-inspiring, right? It's of immense cultural value, and there's no better proof of that than this constellation map here. We find so much meaning in the stars. In fact, I was looking at this earlier, and I found the outline of my talk. So to walk you through it, today I'm going to start by talking a little bit about light pollution. You guys probably know it all already, but I'll be brief. And then its effects on insects specifically and how they might tie to the insect apocalypse. I'll be brief about that too. And then fireflies, which are this really amazing combination of light and night and insect. And then I'll talk about a case study that I carried out last summer on a very special species of firefly. But to get started, artificial light looks like this, right? We know this isn't natural. We know these lights are put there by people, and when you take them all together, they will create something like this, this unnaturally bright night sky, which covers over 23% of the land surface of the Earth. And we know that if things keep going the way they have been, artificial light will eventually cover the planet, right? And this light is what stops us from being able to stargaze in urban areas. But what I want to really stress today is that it has impacts on people and places very far away from cities. And this is actually kind of ties in with something I'll be talking about. The needs of astronomers and the needs of conservation ecologists concerned about light pollution are often aligned, but they're not perfectly aligned. And many of the things that we do for dark skies are not necessarily going to help the animals. So keep that in mind as I go on. So we saw another one of these earlier. Here's the night sky in Chaco National Historical Park, which is an international dark sky park that the Park Service puts a lot of effort into protecting so that visitors can experience the night sky as the ancestral Pueblo peoples once saw it. But even here in this very isolated dark sky park, the night sky isn't natural. If you subtract out the Milky Way and other natural sources of light, you can clearly see the glow of nearby cities on the horizon. There's something deeply ironic about this, right? Looking at the night sky is supposed to make us feel small, and you look here and you can see Albuquerque on the same scale as the Milky Way. But it gets even worse than this. Even in the most remote areas with no visible sky glow whatsoever, the places that would be totally black on those maps I showed earlier, you still get things like this: car headlights and other point sources of light that are too small to get picked up by a satellite, but still radically alter the nocturnal environment. Oh, how did I get an image from space in 1955? It's a model. So now obviously I took this photo is from a Ford owners forum where they were all talking about which car had the brightest headlights and comparing them. Somebody took this photo, which was like great to read. Obviously we can't ask people to drive around without headlights until we get driverless cars, but that's a whole other topic. However, I think all of us can agree these kind of issues can be solved with technology. And the technology that a lot of us are interested in are LEDs. Now, LEDs have a really bad reputation, right? Because they're often so bright and so blue heavy as to be seriously offensive to the eyeballs. But, you know, they can come in any color of the rainbow. And these monochrome lights might just be our best way of avoiding certain environmental impacts of artificial light. I heard Mario talk about this earlier, right? The whole blue versus amber thing, that's where we're going. But first, let's talk about these environmental impacts. What am I even talking about, right? So for more information, James very nicely mentioned my review papers. If you want more details on links between artificial light and the insect apocalypse, I've written a lot of stuff on it, and you're welcome to look it up. This is freely available. This, if you want to give it a read, just send me an email and I'll give you a copy. So in these works, I've tried to categorize the effects of light pollution into 5 categories. To start, we call this first category is called temporal disorientation. Basically, artificial light can interfere with an insect's perception of time. So in this scenario here, we have a moth that comes out at night to pollinate a flower, perhaps. But when it's too bright outside, it might decide to wait until it gets dark, and it might end up waiting forever. Similarly, on a year scale, this is fantastic. So this is an aphid that produces clonal daughters during the summer via live birth, as you do. But studies show that as the weather gets colder, in light polluted areas, the days still seem really long. So it doesn't seem like winter, even though it's cold. So the aphids will keep carrying on with their summertime activity instead of preparing for what's to come. And I want to note that this kind of a thing, and even this kind of a thing on a day-night cycle, both of these types of temporal disorientation are not unique to nocturnal insects. Light pollution is not just a nocturnal insect problem. And intuitively, we must know this, right? Because we know that if we stay up late swiping on our phone, it makes it hard to sleep. And we know that we can use happy lights to sort of fend off the Boston winter blues. And insects are the same way, diurnal insects, right? Anytime we're worried about sort of mismatches in timing, we should also be worried, oh, sorry, okay, let's try that over. Anytime we're worried about mismatches in circadian rhythms caused by climate change, which is a huge topic of discussion in my field and maybe has just kind of come out of left field in this talk, my apologies. But anytime we talk about climate change in this way, we should also be talking about light pollution, but people very rarely do. All right. The second type of disorientation is spatial disorientation. So you may not know that some insects, including the dung beetle shown here, they actually navigate with respect to the stars, with respect to the moon, or even the Milky Way. The Milky Way, however, is now completely obscured in many suburban and urban habitats. And so what is a dung beetle to do, right? How is it going to know where it's going? Dung beetles, by the way, are seriously endangered, although nobody has pointed to light pollution as a possible cause. There's an extreme form of spatial disorientation, which is akin to what's happening to the migratory birds, which you can call phototaxis, or movement towards or away from light. Some moths are apparently so disoriented that they are compelled towards light sources like lamps or windows, where they become trapped and are unable to escape. And about 2 years ago now, this became something of a meme, and everybody had a good laugh at the moth's expense, except it is not just moths that do this, and it's actually not terribly funny when you think about it. So these are mayflies attracted to the lights over a bridge, swarming, mating, and laying eggs on this road. The eggs are not supposed to be on this road. They're supposed to be in the water underneath the bridge. So this is kind of a big issue, right? And then the final way in which light pollution affects insects requires a little explanation. So please bear with me. It's something that people don't really talk about enough. So imagine that you are an insect that comes out at night and you're interested in finding a particular species of plant. It doesn't matter what species, I just found a lot of pictures of this one. So at night, the plant might look something like this. It has sort of a bluish illumination, it's very dark, right? But under light of an unusual color, it could be completely unrecognizable. Now, granted, most artificial streetlights aren't quite that blue yet, but even small differences, like between a cool white or a warm white LED, could make it difficult for insects to recognize host plants, prey, predators, or others of their species. And by the way, a lot of streetlights do look kind of like this. So this is a particularly big problem for fireflies because the green flash of a firefly shows up really well against darkness, but is pretty easily obscured by background light. And actually, to make matters worse, fireflies are red-green colorblind, so it gets really hard to see under certain colors of light. Now, let's talk about fireflies. So these are these amazing insects, right? They're beetles that come out at night in the summer months. And in America, or North America, actually all of the Americas, both males and females will produce bioluminescent flashes, which they use to find and court one another prior to mating. They exchange these flashes as a kind of conversation. And if the female likes what she sees, she'll let the male come over. So these are also, I mean, these insects have immense cultural value as well, right? Who among us doesn't have romantic memories of catching fireflies or bioluminescent click beetles as a child, right? Well, as we have gradually lit up our night, and by the way, this image I got from Googling house lighting before after. If you ever want to make yourself really mad, I recommend Google image house lighting before after. It's like, before it was so terrible, and now look, we lit up this tree. Who knows why? Anyway, it's bright. But as we have gradually lit up our night and the Milky Way has faded from view in many areas, fireflies also have disappeared from a lot of places where they were once found. So the purpose of my PhD is to find out whether these things are related. And if artificial light is causing firefly declines, what can we do about it? For many years, researchers in my field have advocated the use of firefly-friendly lights when out in the field, meaning lights of a color that fireflies can't see very well, or at least don't react to. We just can't seem to agree on what that color is. I've heard red, amber, and blue. A lot of, in North America specifically, actually, there's a long history of using blue lights to go firefly hunting. So one of my goals last summer was to try to settle this question once and for all. And to do that, I took a 10-hour road trip out of very brightly lit Medford, Massachusetts to Kellettville, Pennsylvania. Oh, a quote from Sarah Lewis, that's my advisor. And so this is Kellettville, this is where I was last summer. There's not a lot of light pollution, not a lot of development, but there are lots of insects, including fireflies. And in fact, the Black Caddis Ranch, which is where I stayed, has so many fireflies that every year they host what's called the Pennsylvania Firefly Festival, which, at least until this year, would attract people from all around the globe, all come to see my study species, this extremely charismatic, synchronously flashing firefly, Photinus carolinus. So I'm going to play a video in a second. Basically, what happens is the males of this species will flash all together around 8 times, and then they wait about 8 seconds and begin again. So they flash all at once, and then the forest will go dark for a brief period, which is the time that the females have to respond, and then the cycle will start over again. It's a stunning display following a full day of fun insect-related activities that make the $5 entrance fee really, really worth it. However, lottery tickets are hard to come by, as Diana points out. So this is a tourist event, right? And these fireflies come out very late at night in the deep, dark woods. So festival visitors need some sort of light to guide them to the viewing areas, lest somebody fall in the river or get eaten by a bear. But nobody wants to impact the firefly display or the firefly habitat more generally. So the purpose of my study was to build on what we already know about fireflies, specifically that we know that white light makes male fireflies flash less. There's a great body of research about this, and I review it a bit in my review paper. But what we don't know is the following. We don't know how light affects synchronously flashing fireflies, which is really a very unique behavior. We don't know what colors of light are most disruptive to fireflies generally. We've only ever studied white light. And we don't know how this light will affect other insects in the area, because this is an ecological system, right? Light that's good for fireflies might be bad for other insects and vice versa. So to study this, I did the following, so my methods. We stayed here at the Black Caddis Ranch Firefly B&B. They host the festival. The festival happens back here in the woods, and they go along this path. We worked along the forest edge here, where the fireflies are basically in the woods, but they'll sort of spill out onto the lawn. And we set up 4 plots, and at each plot we installed a 6-foot pole and suspended a shielded LED floodlight of 3 different colors: blue, amber, red, and a dark control. They were all equally bright, except for the dark control, obviously, which was dark. And we randomized the order of the lights each day. And each night we would visit all of these 4 plots, which here's like a bird's eye view. So these are 4 plots that are all 30 meters apart. There's a lot of walking. This is sort of the path in the backyard, and this is the forest edge. And so the plot would go perpendicularly back into the woods. So if you zoom in here, each plot is made up of 4 little subplots, as we call them. This is going to get a little technical, and I'll do my best to make it as painless as possible. But we divided this plot into 4 subplots called A, B, C, and D. A being closest to the path, D being closest to the forest, and the light itself falling between B and C. Now, Photinus carolinus fireflies are active for about 2 hours each night. So for 2 hours each night from 10 p.m. to midnight, myself and at least one other unlucky soul visited every single plot twice in random order. And at each plot we visited every single subplot twice in random order, and at each subplot we spent 60 seconds counting the number of Photinus carolinus male flash patterns produced within that subplot during that minute. Basically, did we see males flashing or not? We also put sticky traps under the light to measure how many moths and other insects that each light attracted. And here's what we found. So these are the 4 colors of light that we used, and these are our subplots. And just to remind you, A is closest to the path and the yard, D is closest to the forest where the fireflies are coming from, and the light falls between B and C. And so our chances of observing flashes near the sort of path, near the yard was, we saw them about, let's see, what is that? 2 out of every 10 times that we visited a subplot, we saw a flash in there. And as we got closer to the woods, right, in darkness, the amount of flashes increased a lot, because that's the woods are where the fireflies are coming from. But when we had lights present, you see this big dip. And remember, these lights are right here in between the 2, right? You see this big dip in your chance of seeing any flash activity at all. And so here's some statistics for the stats nerds out there. But basically what this shows is that all these 3 colors have a huge impact on how much flashing or the probability of seeing any flashing at all. And among the 3 colors, it seems like maybe red is slightly better than blue, but you know what's the worst? Amber, by far. Remember that, that's important. And so this is the sticky trap data I'm showing. So these are the insects of other insect orders that we attracted. So this is flies and mosquitoes, which was the bulk of everything we caught were flies and mosquitoes. I thought it was gonna be some amazing entomological, I was gonna see all this crazy stuff, and I just spent hours counting gnats on sticky traps. So that was fun. So it was mostly flies and mosquitoes, and then some of these leaf hoppers, tree hoppers type situation. And basically, in darkness, we caught about 100 insects, just by chance they happened to fly into it. And under light of any color, we caught a lot more. We caught the least under red light, and the most, well, amber and blue were tied, statistically speaking. So a lot of people say blue light's really bad for insects, amber isn't. I mean, UV is certainly super attractive, but when it comes to blue itself, you know, these results are not totally out of line with previous research, although we did see a big effect of amber. So something to think about. Okay, what does this all mean? I hear you ask. Oh, look, by the way, it's the constellation Lampyridae. What did we learn? Light seems to be bad for synchronously flashing fireflies. Any sort of light makes them flash not as much. When it comes to different colors of light, amber is especially bad. Blue and red are both kind of equally bad, but not as bad. When it comes to other insects, looks like blue and amber are both pretty bad, and red is not as bad, but still pretty bad. So if you put all of these things together, it seems that red light comes out on top and amber comes out on bottom, which is extremely unfortunate because, as a lot of you know, the amber LED is increasingly touted as the environmentally friendly solution that we've all been waiting for. It's good for your circadian rhythm, it's good for dark skies, it's good for baby sea turtles, at least that's what they say, even though research shows otherwise. In my personal opinion, and this is admittedly in a hot take, as they say, it's not quite a popular opinion, but I think it's important. This focus on the color of light it's a complete distraction from the real issue, which is brightness. We're never going to find, as somebody is saying in the chat, we're never going to find a color of light that only humans can see that has no environmental impacts. Instead, what we should really be thinking about is the intensity of the light, because animals that can't see amber can still see a ultra bright amber LED, because vision works in terms of probabilities. And if this light is super bright, some of those photons are going to sneak by. If an animal has a 1 in 100 chance of seeing an amber photon and your LED headlamp puts out 100 million billion amber photons, you can do the math, right? So in my mind, the perfect environmentally friendly lighting is red. It's very well shielded. It's used only where needed, right? We agree about all these things. This is, by the way, a neighborhood right next to a bat sanctuary in South Holland that's really actually enacted this red lighting, which I think is awesome. However, like saying all this, I think, again, this is a distraction from the real issue. We want to talk about buying different colors of light because we want to create some sort of thing that people can buy, because that is, you know, how we get funding, right? But in many cases, I don't think anybody needs to buy anything. More important is, well, maybe buying curtains, all right, curtains, or turning out lights when people aren't around. So this is maybe a dream of mine, but the reality is this: the Alewife Brook Reservation right down the road from me, which has these purportedly eco-friendly buildings here that have no window curtains and leave their lights on all night. This is seriously low-hanging fruit, and I wrote an op-ed about it, which I will put in the chat for you to read in your spare time. But I think, you know, we don't need to be caught up in, you don't have to spend money to buy an amber bulb to be environmentally friendly. It's much more important that you keep your lights dim and don't use them when you're not around. So with that, lots of thanks go out to everybody who supported this research and who helped me carry it out. And I'd be happy to talk more. Oh, the reflection in the water, yeah, I know.
Thank you, Avalon. Thank you from all of us.
Yeah.
Lots of applause. We are now at our the nominal end of our meeting, but if the speakers wouldn't mind spending a few extra minutes of your Sunday to answer questions, I'm sure there will be some. So obviously respecting everybody's time. If you need to go, you need to go, including the speakers. But if there are questions that we might be able to entertain for a few minutes, I'm sure we would all appreciate it. Thank you so much to all three of you for sharing your expertise and time with us. Would anybody like to share a question for us, specifically for Avalon? I see Richard posts hand up.
Yeah, since this is the first time I've heard the argument about insects, I'm familiar with birds and obviously lots of different issues. How do people respond? I mean, because most people find insects to be kind of annoying on
Yes.
average. And so I'm just curious what kind of response you get.
That's a great question. You know, I used to be one of those people. I always hated insects growing up, and now look at me. So change is possible, right? I think more and more people are realizing we might not like insects, but they are sort of the foundation of our food web, right? They make pollination happen. They are food for the birds that we love so much. And all sorts of things. If we lose insects, we lose everything. And I think the insect apocalypse news story that's been circulating has actually done a lot to raise people's sort of impression of insects. But actually, I'm very lucky because I work with the one type of insect that people love. And actually, I think fireflies are a great flagship organism for dark sky education more generally, because not only do people have these super fond memories of them, but also it's really obvious how light pollution could affect them. You don't have to go into a huge explanation about, you know, with birds, right? Obviously, probably more people pay attention to the birds anyway, but it's not immediately intuitive what lights are doing to birds, but a lot of people, if you say fireflies and light pollution, they get it immediately and they care.
Thanks, Avalon. Another question. There's a question from Kelly, it looks like.
Hey, Avalon, thank you very much. You know, this amber thing it's kind of a red herring because that's an anthropomorphic solution to lighting at night. We amateur astronomers know that red light is what preserves our dark adaptation, but it's also the case that the rods in our eyes, which are our night sensors, are pitifully unresponsive to red light. And so red light, amber light is sort of the, you know, a nice way to get a discernibility, right, in nighttime settings without having all the blue. I mean, we're sort of pounding on that you can't have blue.
Yeah.
But you're right. The amber is photoactive, especially for fireflies, too. And so what we need to do is evolve our human rods so that they become much more sensitive to red light than they are now, and then we'll be all set.
Well, no, I mean, it's a good point. So firefly, I was surprised to learn this. I actually, for my master's research, I studied a Taiwanese species of firefly, and for whatever reason, amber light was totally fine for them. They didn't really seem to notice at all. Now, red light, it has a lot of downsides, as people are pointing out. So birds can see it. People don't want red light districts. That's another downside that we have to think about, right, because of the connotations. And also, sometimes, not so much with the light I used in this experiment, but I've done others with different colors, and the red can be hard for me to see. So if you want a red that really doesn't affect fireflies, it's one that even I can't see. And that's not helpful for anybody, right? Which is, again, I think why color is a red herring and a distraction. We're not going to find a good color. We need to have timers and motion sensors, really, and curtains.
Let me ask if there are also questions for Deanna or Will in addition to Avalon. Questions that are occurring to somebody now that you haven't yet put in the chat. Well,
I have a question.
yes, please.
And I don't know if Mario is still on the call, because I would love his input on this one. You know, he probably remembers, like, he's been copied on certain emails. We won't go in details because I know this is recorded, between very passionate dark sky advocates that are working really hard to get the lowest CCT, you know, that they possibly can, you know, particularly in residential areas and so forth. And so, you know, it is so difficult not having this Goldilocks of lighting that I could just say, this will solve everybody's problem. It's like, it's more like picking the one that could cause the least harms to the most species. And so, so the question is, how do we deal? Because I know that what I'm hearing from a lot of advocates, particularly those worry about what's going on in residential areas and stuff, is that there's so much more preference for the amber. Obviously, we don't have as many fireflies populations in the urban centers, but I'm just wondering, like from the perspective of like human health and wildlife, and like how do we?
I can respond on the firefly part. I think, yeah. Well, luckily, firefly habitat is more and more restricted. So I think we can have different requirements for natural versus residential areas. And in general, right, are we ever going to prioritize firefly populations over pollinator populations? Like realistically, probably not. Even though they have this great cultural value, they're not pollinators and they don't provide ecosystem services. And that's like the most depressing thing ever, but it's true. So I think amber is totally great for residential areas as long as it's really shielded, there's no glare, and it's on timers and motion detectors. But in natural areas and even like city parks or reserves or anything like that, I mean, really there's no reason for any sort of lighting unless you have a tourist event, in which case we could think specifically about the fireflies. But I've seen, I mean, being out in the woods in Pennsylvania, like people do a lot of oil and gas drilling there, and would have these sort of machinery things laying out in the woods with no one there with a white light on all night for no reason. Like that stuff's easy to fix.
This discussion reminds us all of the importance of paying attention to all the elements of light pollution, not just the brightness, not just the shielding, not just the color, but all of them. And is the light in a place where it needs to be? And is it on only when it needs to be? So we've just touched on the 5 principles. I put it in the chat here, a link to one of the numerous places you can find this, including on the IDA website. But here it is on the IES website, the 5 principles of good lighting that IDA and IES have recently agreed upon. And we see that in the discussion here. How best to protect birds and humans and the night sky and fireflies and pollinators. It's not just going to come from the color. Wow. Okay, this has been a tremendous gift to all of us. Thank you, Avalon and Will and Deanna. And thanks to everybody else for joining today. Again, join IDA if you're not a member. Join our monthly meetings here in IDA Mass. We have Zoom calls. We were doing it since long before the pandemic. We were trendsetters. So for us, the pandemic was really kind of ho-hum, really. And we invite your participation on a continuing basis. We need your support. We need you to weigh into your representatives. We need you to propose good ideas to your local government as well. We need you to get involved in any way, small or large. You can start with talking to your neighbors, or even just fixing your own light on your own back porch, and then spread it out from there.